Ursula was born ready. Yeah, that's hard to buy when you're fucking 400 minutes late to every single podcast. Greg Everett, Ursula Garza.
Ready. I didn't think I was the place to utilize that preparedness.
Ursula has decided to grace us with her presence once again on this podcast, unlike last time.
Oh my God, it was 1 out of 22.
No one wants to hear me talking to myself. Okay. healthiq.com/catalyst. If you need life insurance because you're a strapping young lad or lady who is healthy because you lift weights, these guys will get you better rates by smashing these underwriters over the head with science and data proving that you will live longer and therefore end up costing them less money, or at least deferring the cost when you die. healthiq.com/catalyst. Also, go check out catalystathletics.org. If you have any extra money and you need to get rid of it, we will gladly take it off your hands. And because we are a 501c3, you can write that off on your taxes. So even if you want to donate $1, all of it goes straight to our athletes. They would very much appreciate it. And so would I, because that's money that doesn't have to come directly out of my pocket because they're getting it anyway. And then finally, before we get started on the stuff you actually want to hear, if you have a minute and you're inclined toward generosity, go over to iTunes or whatever you listen to this on and leave a review for us. A nice one, of course. Don't leave a bad review. Don't be like the guys on YouTube who just go around and just thumbs down stuff just for the sake of popping that thumbs down button. You're just a miserable person. Try to cheer up. If you don't like us, just stop listening. Ursula, you wanted to mention your competition.
A couple of events happening at the Naturally Fit Games on June 3rd. And if you go to naturallyfit.com and look under the games, you'll see registration for all sorts of events. But under Olympic weightlifting, we have a weightlifting meet. We have an armed forces only weightlifting meet. And then we have the Texas Barbell Challenge, which is cross-fit-ish, cross-lifting-ish event. This is all barbell. It's a barbell challenge. I don't know how else to describe it. You're on a 8x8 platform, and you have an assigned lift. And the first two lifts are complexes. One's a snatch complex, one's a clean and jerk complex. And then the third event, it remains a mystery to all of us.
The third event, there's 2 lifters and only 1 bar. And only 1 man or woman comes out the other end. No rules.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
I'd watch that.
Yeah, that would probably be way more interesting. But in any case, if you're a weightlifter and you're in the Texas area and you're looking for a meet, we'd love to have you. This is our 4th year hosting the weightlifting championships, the weightlifting wise championships. Last year we had youth nationals, so we had a mini version. So I guess this is our 5th year actually. And we've added this Armed Forces Open, and we've added this barbell challenge. So if you're inclined, $500 to the winner, to the best lifter of each of those events, male and female. And anyways, that's where I'll be June 3rd.
Well, that's not a bad payday just for lifting weights, which you're going to do anyway.
Sure.
I do it for free every day.
I know, me too.
What a couple of idiots.
I know. We need to go somewhere.
Okay.
Of course, we can't beat anybody. That's the primary problem with this.
No. Those days are long gone. Actually, I never really got to those days, but I liked Bob Takano in the American Weightlifting movie, which you all can buy and or rent in various places, and you probably should, when he said something like, I was always the best of the not so talented lifters, or something along those lines. And I was like, wow, yeah, I know what that feels like.
You relate to that?
Yeah. Meanwhile, Ursula's over there just like crushing the whole world.
Yeah,
okay. Let's get started here. I like this first one because it's the shortest question we'll ever get. Thoughts on curling wrists during the lifts?
8
Thanks,
words.
Sean, for saving us all that time. So I assume he means during the first and second pull, tucking the wrists in, cocking the wrists back. My thoughts on that is that I don't like it. I don't think it's necessary. I think that this is one of those things, and people disagree with me all the time, but I think this is one of those things where people have watched lifters lift seen those wrists curl during the pull under of the lift and said, I need to curl my wrists during the lift. Kind of like the whole double knee bend thing where, all the strength and conditioning community was like, oh, well, we have to intentionally push our knees under the bar and teach this position and do all this crazy stuff because they had seen it happening with lifters and just presumed that they were doing it intentionally. The rationale I've heard
with people like over pressuring the front of the foot at the beginning of a pull so that they were on the front. I mean, I think these all fall in line, and they're kind of an assessment of what's going on, and what you're seeing is more of an effect, not intentional movement.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree with the wrist thing. I teach like a flat profile from the forearm down to the knuckle.
Right.
And I think some people teach knuckle down, which is basically the same thing. But I think when they do that, people interpret that to like tuck the wrist because they're like trying to put the front of the bottom, I guess the top, the top of the metatarsal towards the ground to put their knuckles down, and that causes them to flex their forearm. But I mean, we're not looking for any flexion. Any flexion in the forearm, likely with heavy weight, is going to get pulled out, first of all.
Yeah, so think of that as that's analogous to bending the elbows early, where that's just slack in the system that you can lose force through.
And that's one of the reasons I don't like it. Also, I think it's hard to keep the shoulder back when you're pulling if you have your wrist tucked. Because if you have your hand straight to the side and you tuck your wrist in, sometimes that has an effect on the position of the shoulder and hollows out the chest.
Yeah.
And so it makes it hard to keep the upper back tight. And so by the time somebody gets to their hip, their shoulder is rotated forward. And so the bar is basically away from you. And so then you can't tuck your wrist because your wrist is already tucked. I use the flexion of the forearm after the bar contacts and you go to extend to pull under for the third pull. That's when we tuck the wrist to keep the bar in closer proximity to the body during that phase. But if you already have it tucked and then you get there, you can't act on the bar. So I think it could have a really negative effect both physiologically as well as biomechanically if you tuck like right off the floor.
And emotionally.
Or anywhere before the hip.
But see, I would argue though that if you're actively pulling under the bar in a snatch or a clean, as you should be, that flexion of the wrist is going to happen naturally as a part of that. It's not something you have to do. I equate that to, pulling under in a snatch. You don't have to intentionally shrug because that action of trying to lift the elbows high and out is going to force you to shrug. It's like doing an upright row without shrugging. It's impossible. It's totally unnatural. So I think that's one more thing to think about, and that's totally unnecessary. That's just going to slow you down and create problems. And the rationale that I've heard for this many times is, oh, well, you want to cock your wrists in to keep the bar closer to you. Well, it doesn't make any sense because why wouldn't you use your lats and your shoulders and all these big muscles in any part of it really to keep that bar close? That little wrist thing is just going to mean if that's closer, you're just going to have to move your arms farther away.
You're presuming that somebody knows how to pull under. Because if you don't act on the bar right, but some people don't. And
of course not. So let's teach them the right way instead of some half-assed fucking remedy.
I think, like tucking the wrist or somebody with a really long arms, it might be helpful to make sure that they understand that they need to do that. Because if you have a really long radius ulna length and you don't get your elbow up and your wrist in, the bar will move away. I've seen a lot of people like just rotate the shoulder as they're coming. You see the bar loop incredibly.
Yeah, I think you're missing the point, though.
Yeah, no, I mean that's.
Yeah, I know I'm missing the point, but I'll continue anyway.
No, because I still think it's something that happens. I still think it's important for people to hear that it's something that happens, and you're looking for that as a coach, and then you can identify, I need to teach this person how to pull under the bar and make sure that the bar stays close from the hip as they pull under, and so I think I've actually noticed on some of my lifters, when I first get them, they come from like a particular other coach that doesn't say anything about that. And they almost look like they're doing, how like when you rev a motorcycle and you turn, you flex your extensors, like they get to the hip and then I swear that's what they do. And I'm like, well, what are you doing? You're not riding a motorcycle. And they'll put the wrist the other way. And so to teach them to tuck the wrist in is helpful.
I, in all these years, have never once seen somebody do that. So I don't know what kind of goofballs you're coaching.
Hey, it's a particular coach that doesn't have an act on.
Well, he's obviously not sending lifters to me.
Your way, yeah.
Yeah, thankfully.
Well, it's a lack of acting on the bar at all after the hip. It's one of those, you know, how some people just learn to throw the bar up and then they dive under.
Yes.
I get some of those.
Oh, we get those all the time. Yes, that's pretty common. Okay, so well, let's see if we can enumerate the points that we actually agree on.
Oh no, we cannot.
Yes, we can. Number 1, the wrists do need to curl under during the pull under the bar. Yes. Right. Okay.
Yes.
What I'm saying is that if you are pulling under the bar, I know it's a long list. If you're pulling under the bar correctly, that's not something you have to intentionally do. I would agree with you that it's something you can look at as a coach, and if it's not happening, you need to address the overall pull under the bar. Not necessarily that specifically, but I agree if you have someone who's doing the exact opposite, of course you're going to have to address it. I just don't see that happening a lot. Okay? And then we would agree, number 2, that you do not want to curl the wrists during the first and second pull. You want more of a neutral wrist, basically like the back of the hand and the back of the forearm are in a straight line with each other. Yeah?
Right.
Okay, so we got 2 things.
So we got 2. Whoa. Just glad we whipped out those numbers.
Hey, there's plenty of people in the world with whom I can't even agree on 2 things. So let's not
I think those are the only 2 major. Those are the 2 major things. Like that is it. Those 2 points.
Okay.
Done.
Why don't you read this next question because I don't have it.
I'm just kidding.
No. Okay, Ursula. Get that next question because I don't have it.
Does flat feet have an effect on your lifts? And we both had originally confused that for like flat-footed pulling. That's not what was meant. Are there any drills that one with flat feet? They're talking about a collapsed arch, right?
We think so. We're pretty sure that's what it is.
Any drills that one with flat feet, and one with flat feet would be, I think, the key, can do to lessen the effect? This was quick. We both disposed of it fairly quickly in our pre-conversation. And Greg said it even right as I was thinking it. He's faster than me. That just put some fucking orthotics in and fix your flat feet. Yeah. And the main problem is the collapsing of your knee, like your knees coming in. And I'll let Greg tell you what he thinks that looks like.
I don't even remember what I said. Something about a baby giraffe trying to ice skate.
Yeah. So basically, so you don't look like that while you're doing your cleans, you should put an arch support or an orthotic so that you have normal alignment of the femur to the tibia to your tarsals and metatarsals. So you don't have your knee collapsing as you're standing up and creating that deviated line that puts a lot of stress on the inside of the knee.
Yeah.
So that's something you can do. You can get some orthotics.
And that's like the easiest possible thing to do. I mean, there are exercises to try to strengthen your arch and stuff like that. And you can do those till you're blue in the face if that's what you're into. Personally, I don't have the time or the interest or any fucking inclination to do that stuff. I got plenty of other things I'd rather do. And if I can throw some orthotics in my shoes, which I do have and have used for years and years and years, I don't have to. So I don't care. If you plan on lifting barefoot, then I suppose you're going to have to invest more time and effort into rebuilding your arch. I just would not recommend that particular approach. Because if you're going to lift barefoot, that means you also have to lift on like a stick with rocks tied to the ends. And just like if you're going to be natural, you got to go fully natural. Don't half-ass it. Oh, I've got a barbell with bearings and chalk and rubberized plates, but no weightlifting shoes because that's bullshit. Get the fuck out of here with that. Okay. So yeah, the drill is go to the store and buy some orthotics. One rep, one set. Oh boy. Okay.
I'm glad you didn't use all of the other offensive language though that you used. You just went caveman.
I don't remember the other language I used. It's all fairly profane when it comes down to it.
I don't know. Slightly offensive to some large section of my home city.
What?
You call them hippies. You said fucking hippies. Quit walking around with your fucking barefoot and flowers in your hair, some shit like that. That's what you...
I didn't say anything about flowers in the hair.
Well, that's what I pictured.
Okay. Well, stop projecting on me.
I know, that was my image. Like, I see these people walking around, like, with flowers in their hair and no shoes, like, skipping through.
Well, but see, here's the thing. I have no issue with hippies, but if you want to be full-on hippie, you don't get to be a weightlifter, too. Those things are incongruous.
No, I don't have any hippie weightlifters, I don't think. And I'm in Austin. If there was ever going to be a hippie weightlifter, it would be in Austin, probably.
Yeah, maybe.
San Fran.
Okay. Let's move on to Lacey's question before we offend the other half of the Austin population. Hello, Greg and Ursula. I have a question regarding programming. I train with an old school style coach who does not write programs and does not necessarily believe in them.
This question.
Back when he lifted, he went the, quote, intuitive method and just trained the area he thought he needed to work on most, like pecs. He did lift internationally and held an American record snatch in one of the old weight classes. I have used several of the Catalyst Athletics programs as well as some Takano programs and had great results even though they weren't written specifically for me. I've also played around with writing a few short programs for myself with good results as well. My question is, what are your thoughts on the idea of training intuitively as opposed to using a program, even if it's a program written for a general audience? And is there a point where one is more appropriate than the other, if ever? I follow Greg and Catalyst. I can't pronounce my own name. That's embarrassing. For quite a few years now and listened to all of the podcasts, so I think I have a pretty good idea what your thoughts might be, but I'd still be interested in what you have to say. Thank you for your consideration. You're welcome.
Hold on.
Hold on. Okay.
Just wait
Standing
a second. I have something that I wrote about this in particular. I'm going to read this to you because it's something that I talk about in the Art of Coaching Weightlifting. And I wrote this down just to make it easier for me to verbalize every time. So programming as an outline to improve the physical capacity and performance of an athlete. That's its purpose, right? And to actualize results on a given day. So in weightlifting, there needs to be a heightened result achieved in a very specific time frame. A certain number of reps at one weight is used to predict the ability to successfully lift a heavier weight in the future. Programming then simply becomes the manipulation of the load via reps, sets, and intensities to ensure physical improvement of the organism's level over time. We start with what can be accomplished and build to more reps until it predicts the ability to successfully increase intensity. Successful lifts are the cornerstone, where many unsuccessful attempts indicate lack of adaptation physiologically or possibly technically. The end goal is to make the heavier weights feel the lightest they've ever felt on the day of the actual competition. The only question I asked lifters after a meet was, did it feel lighter than usual? If they say yes, then I've done my job. In order to achieve this improvement, one must have increasing load and or intensity with periodic bouts of rest to ensure adaptation and compensation. I start with a linear progression, move into an undulation mode once the work capacity, aka sporting form, has been achieved. This allows for the successful performance of higher intensities regularly. One can choose to progress either volume or intensity, and the norm in conditioning phase is to progress volume first, then shift to intensity increases. Or moderate increase in both can be done depending on current form of the athlete. I would say intuition should be used. I'm done reading that. Intuition should be used to modify the program as needed if you see one area is faltering. But going by without having any kind of a plan, and just because somebody doesn't write down the whole plan every day doesn't mean they don't have a plan. But so you don't have to have a whole spreadsheet with the quadrennium laid out, or even a year, or even a month, or even a week. I think as long as the coach tells you, and you can see the progress in the program, then you are following a program. So I would write down what I'm doing every day and expect to see some pattern of improvement or an increase in either intensities and or volume and load, or reps and sets, so load, and some kind of manipulation of that to be able to predict results on a particular day.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying.
Take a breath.
Okay, I read it all and I said everything I have to say about that.
I don't believe that for a second.
All I have to say about that.
I'll get one sentence in and you'll have something else to say. I guarantee it.
I'm not. I'm gonna go get my coffee.
Oh God, you always say that and you never do. Yeah, I would agree with all of that, and there's absolutely intuition should play a huge role in training, both from a coach perspective and an athlete perspective. But I think it needs to play that role within the framework of a plan. If you are truly going day by day, I think you are limiting yourself, like, oh, what do I feel like doing today? Well, chances are what you feel like doing day to day, by and large, is going to be the things that you enjoy doing, which is going to be the things that you need the least. And so it's kind of naturally selects for the stuff you need to work on the least, so you end up avoiding the things that you have to do in order to get better, so for me that would be, say, squatting or something like that. And I 100% agree with Ursula too, where when I write programs, we may write a 12-16 week program or something like that. I don't actually write 12 to 16 weeks at one time. I have somewhat of a loose sketch actually written down of what my plan is. Mostly it's in my head, but I write myself notes, for each period, each mesocycle, this is what we're going to do, what the particular goals for that is, each of those periods is. So for example, in, one of the preparation mesocycles, maybe there's a particular complex that we're working on, and I'm going back through that athlete's records and seeing their best in that complex. Well, the goal obviously is to beat that, and I'm probably going to come up with an actual number that I want to beat it. Maybe I want to beat it by 5 kilos. Maybe I think we can only beat it by 3 kilos. Whatever that case is, I want that goal in mind when I'm actually writing out that program in detail, to make sure that I'm leading into that and not getting, say 3 weeks in and then saying, well, next week I wanted to go for this record, but we're way off track. We're not even close. So I probably should have paid more attention to this for the last 3 weeks. And then, I usually write 1 week at a time in full detail. So because that allows me to not only follow that plan that I've sketched out beforehand, but also to adjust based on what has happened the week before or 2 weeks before this, or, the whole cycle leading into that. Obviously, a lot can change in 3 to 4 months. And if you're not able, or even worse, not willing to make adjustments, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. You can't lock yourself in to such a rigid program for such a long period of time. It just won't work. And I think the more experienced coaches that I've discussed this kind of stuff with, the longer they've been doing it, the less prescriptive their programs are, in that sense, where they are saying, okay, well, here's what I would like to do on this day, but we're probably going to end up changing weights. We might end up changing reps. We might end up changing freaking exercises, or we might take the day off, based on what's happening. And they don't lose their minds about it. Like, oh my God, this one day didn't happen exactly as I planned it should 6 weeks ago. So now I'm pulling my hair out and worrying this program's not going to work. There are, I know of a number of, high level coaches who don't even necessarily prescribe, weights and sets so much. They'll actually say, okay, we're going to work on this exercise for 30 minutes and let's probably do triples or something along those lines. And then the rest of the details are actually determined, as that athlete is training, based on how they look and how they feel. And so that's a fairly extreme example. I personally wouldn't usually go that far. I'd like to have somewhat more of a plan, but it's doable.
Doing that on some days and saying, we're just going to work on technique today and we're going to stay kind of light. Mm-hmm. And then they look great. And you're like, you know what, you look really fast today. Let's go up a little bit. And then you might have to modify the rest of the week because you've done more that day than you thought you were going to do. Or if you do less one day than you thought you were going to do, but whether you have that written down or it's just in your head, the idea is that there is a direction and some sort of a rudimentary sketch at the least of how you're going to get there. And it may not be written down. I used to do a lot of my programming day to day, but I knew where I was going, and I had done that particular cycle of programming so many times. What I might change is like the exercise in one cycle versus another year cycle of that same time frame.
Right. Well, so you weren't writing the program day to day. You were writing workouts day to day. You had the program in mind.
Right.
It's kind of an existing template that you've used before and found successful, and then you can make those little tweaks as needed. Like, oh, this didn't work as well as I thought, or, you know, I have to change this exercise for this particular athlete because he or she has somewhat different needs or can't do this or whatever the case is. But yeah, I think... Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, for my little girl that I coach that's 13, I do her programs in her book every day. And I used to do that with a lot of my athletes. For me, it just got to the point where I had so many people to write programs for. If I did it that way, it would be hard for me to retain everybody's information in my head. Yeah. When I was only writing 4 or 5 programs, I could write them all out. Everybody's could be a little bit different, and it could address their problems, and we could be progressing. With her, because we have things like growth spurts and vacation, and she starts PE and she's running, like the day-to-day adjustment is a little bit bigger. But I keep her note, I make them have their book with me so I can look back to make sure that we're progressing in the program, that there's some sort of progression, either the intensity has gone up or if we have to take a step back, that we, where were we at that we're stepping back from and then rebuilding. I don't think just because somebody doesn't hand you a paper with a whole month or a week or, a pre-written daily program, that it doesn't mean that they're not doing an adequate job in programming. I think it really, are you getting results? If you're getting results, then great. With beginners, I often I might have a template of some sort, and then we make major deviations on it based on what I'm seeing. Like sometimes you're saying, okay, today we're going to do clean and jerk, and then the bar's crashing the whole time, and you end up, putting them on a block and working on power cleans plus cleans, just trying to meet the bar. Like you shift courses more quickly, I think, with those guys than you do with your well-seasoned athletes, where you're really on some sort of a time schedule, like we've got to get these results by this date. Right. And then you feel, I think there's a little bit more pressure in that, and you're less willing to say, oh, we're just going to step back for 2 weeks because you have finals. You're like, you need to learn to manage all of this, and you may have to rewrite the program for that person if they have finals, as nationals is coming up, which happens, or Americans, which happens. But once you've done that a couple of times, then you realize, like, maybe I need to taper a little bit early and pull out some volume a little bit earlier than I normally do, because they're not able to handle all the stress that's coming in, because nationals and Americans always happens. But then that becomes something that you recognize, and you're able to adjust, not just one time, but that it's going to be a future incident. And so now you've adjusted the actual programming that you do for those circumstances that are arising. But for unknown circumstances, that's why you have to be willing to function on intuition. Like, you don't know when your athlete works a full day, like 8 to 5, and it was like the most stressful day of their life. And even though they're ready to hit a 1 rep or 2 rep max and something because the program dictates it, they're not mentally ready. They can't. They're exhausted. So then now you got to rewrite that whole week's program potentially to try to still get those results that should be predicted by their previous work. You don't want to just leave that off the table, but you might move around some of the week's work so that you can successfully complete that week's work.
Remember like 10 minutes ago when you said that was all you had to say?
Yeah, I know. That was all I had to say.
I was right again. But yeah, I think the most important point that Ursula made there is that the question is whether or not you're making progress, and whether or not you feel that progress is adequate, and you believe that it's as much progress as you would make with some other approach, which is, I realize that's hard to evaluate. You don't really know, and you can't really know because you can't compare the same period of time to itself.
Right, but he says that he's done programs and then done the kind of fly by the seat of your pants method, and if you've noticed a marked difference in like his training state or his ability to produce results on one versus the other, then there's your answer.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's one of those things too, where, coaches typically are unfortunately very, locked into their particular approach to things. Some of the better coaches are a lot more flexible, rather than like, okay, this is exactly my method. If you don't like it, or if it doesn't work well for you, then you can fuck off and find someone else. Because most times that's not really an option. If you're in the middle of nowhere and you happen to be near one coach, that's the one coach you happen to be near. You don't get to go shop around for coaches like CrossFit gyms. So I would say if you want to stick with that coach, if you want to keep getting coaching, but you'd like to kind of steer him, toward more of a rigid program, maybe just have, a candid discussion with him and say, hey, like it really freaks me out not having any idea what I'm going to do for the rest of the week. Is there any way maybe you could just kind of give me, a real loose sketch of what I'm doing for the week, ahead of time, or just something along those lines where you're at least bridging the gap somewhat, and it maybe reassures you that he's not just pulling stuff arbitrarily out of his ass each day, and that he does actually have some forethought on what's going into this program. And he may say, absolutely not, go fuck yourself. I don't know, because I don't know who we're talking about.
Greg.
Huh?
I said, then you can blame Greg and insist that he become your coach.
No thanks. I don't want to coach anymore. I'm retiring. Okay. I actually was talking to someone. Tell
all your athletes that.
Yeah, no, they know. They know I hate them all. I was talking to someone who I will not name, although I'd like to give him credit for saying this, but I don't want to get him in trouble. And he said something like, the problem with coaching is all the athletes. It's a lot like the movie Clerks, where he's like, this job would be great if it weren't for all the fucking customers. Okay. Job, I assume, is how you would pronounce this name. Greg and Ursula, I'm looking for clarification on lower back strength. When squatting and pulling heavy weights, my back gives out rounds before my legs fail. I've never gotten stuck in the bottom of a squat or clean, and I feel more fatigue in my lower back than in my quads when working for volume, so I've always assumed that my weak point was my lower back, so I have worked on this weakness accordingly. However, after years of good mornings, back extensions, etc., my lower back is still holding me back, no pun intended. Maybe not, but it was appreciated. Not to mention, my lower back is always sore, not in pain, just sore. Recently, I've read about the theory that the body will naturally shift a heavy load from its weak point to its strong point, i.e. from weak quads to the stronger lower back in my case. Is it possible that all this time I've actually made my problem worse by focusing on a strength, or is that theory just nonsense? If I'm taking the right approach in thinking that my lower back is the problem, why does it persist? When I watch elite lifters, their lower backs are always rigid in the pull phase, so I refuse to accept this limitation as something that can't be solved. Thanks in advance. There's a lot to parse out in this one.
And there's the first, I think, error here is that you comparing, and I'm not saying that Job isn't meant to be a high-level lifter. I'm just saying, like, immediately saying, well, the elite level lifters don't have this problem, so why do I?
Well, I don't think that's the main problem. I think the main problem is comparing quads to the lower back versus quads to the hips. I think that's the real issue. So, Job, the theory is absolutely correct. Your body will reposition itself to put it in its most mechanically strong position to complete whatever motion you're doing. So, if you have weak quads relative to your hips, your body will open the knee more. In other words, it'll tip you over more to get your hips higher to shift more of the work to the hips. Now, the mistake I think you're making in your logic here is that you're looking at as the body shifting the work to your lower back, but that's not what's happening. It's shifting it to your hips. Your hips are just attached to your lower back, and then your lower back has to deal with that added lever, the lever length, in which case it's going to do more work than if it were more upright. So I would argue that in a sense, you may have been exacerbating the problem because with that lower back work, or what you're calling lower back work, you're also doing a lot of hip work, like a good morning, for example. If you're doing RDLs or stiff-legged deadlifts, same kind of thing. Back extensions, that's really direct back work, although you're obviously getting some glute work too. But just think about that. So if you if your quads were stronger, they would be able to move more weight from a smaller joint angle. In other words, from more of a closed knee position, which means that you would stay more upright when you're squatting or pulling more easily, which means your back would have to do less work to stabilize the spine because that lever arm, between the shoulder where the bar is attached to and the hip is shorter. So I think you're just kind of getting the concept a little confused there. And I could be wrong without seeing you lift. I'm kind of guessing at this, but that would be my assumption, that it is actually your legs that are weaker than your hips, but your lower back is taking the brunt of your hips having to take over the additional work. Ursula, am I talking out my ass?
No, I can't say anything to sound any better than that.
but you will anyway.
No, I can't. I really can't improve on that. I was still laughing at this. I watched the Elite Lifters. And
yeah, well, but I mean,
they're almost always well proportioned for the lift. They've already worked on mobility, and their mechanics are good. Like, I just don't.
And there are some who don't have perfectly rigid lower backs when they lift.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's not true across the board.
Yeah, but I did listen to you, and that was very well said, Craig.
You're so generous. I did listen to you. That makes it sound like normally you absolutely do not.
I considered at one point taking out my headphones and then going to get my coffee, but I thought you might stop talking prematurely.
Man. That happened to me at a podcast one time. I was Rob Wolf and John Wellborn, and I was alone at the gym, and FedEx or something showed up, and John and Rob were talking. So I was like, well, fuck, I need to go talk to this guy. So I got up and left, and I came back 5 minutes later, and John was like, what the fuck? I was asking you a question for like 3 minutes. Like, my B. Oh boy. This is the World of Low Production Value podcast, everybody. We are not in a studio with a producer and a sound engineer. We're just a couple of dipshits with microphones.
That's all it takes nowadays.
It is. You're lucky we even have microphones, to be honest. Quit complaining. Okay. This one could be helpful, or it could just end up being a total mess. Well, I mean, actually, that's true about any question we do on this show. So I guess I didn't really need to preface it with that.
There's no predictability.
Roman. We have names that are questionable today. Hey guys, can you expound on why the neutral shoulder position is the best way to receive the barbell in the snatch? I started in CrossFit about 8 years ago and eventually made the transition to a weightlifter, and still consider myself more of a weightlifter than a CrossFitter despite owning a CrossFit affiliate. I train primarily weightlifting and compete in weightlifting meets as opposed to local CrossFit competitions. Okay, dude, we get it. We like you. You're a weightlifter. I'm just kidding. I'm not picking on you, Roman. I just thought it was funny that you went out of your way to make sure we knew you weren't a CrossFitter. We'll take you seriously either way. I've been to seminars where the coach, I'm not going to name names, recommended internal rotation. I remember the cue, make the OK sign to the outside. I don't know why, but that's a funny visual to me. I think so. I've also been to seminars, including the CrossFit Olympic Weightlifting Seminar, where they wanted full external rotation. That's all in capital letters, guys. And trying to get your palms turned inward. Neither of them felt comfortable. Then I went to the Catalyst Seminar with Greg, and he discussed the neutral position, which made sense to me. So what we're all about is making sense. It is still, however, a common topic of debate between myself and other CrossFit/weightlifting coaches. Enlighten us. Okay. This is my thing.
I just want to point something out first that I did when I did. Well, I guess this wasn't the weightlifting seminar. It was the CrossFit level 1. They taught us internal rotation there.
Are you sure? I thought they taught external rotation.
Well, that's the weightlifting one.
That's confusing.
I know.
and
That's what
inconsistent.
I understand why the CrossFit coaches are confused, because I worked with on staff for the weightlifting one, and then took the CrossFit level 1, and they taught external rotation in the weightlifting one and internal rotation in the CrossFit level 1.
Well, it's also an incredibly confusing topic thanks to the interwebs, because every other person is saying the exact opposite thing, and some of them appear to have legitimate credentials. Many of them do not, but for some reason that doesn't seem to stop people from believing them and giving them money, which drives me bananas. But I was making the joke with Ursula before we started the show. You know, the origin of the Bulgarian split squat was basically a joke that Angel Spasov played on the US, saying that the Bulgarian split squat was like the secret to why the Bulgarians were so strong. And of course it wasn't. And that's not to say the Bulgarian split squat is not a valuable exercise. I think it's totally useful, but it sure as shit is not a replacement for squatting.
Right.
And it sure was not the reason.
Him, I squatted all the time. And I read in a CA journal where he wrote stuff about that they don't do pulls, and I'm like, well, what the fuck? Because I'm pulling like every fucking day. I thought they didn't do pulls.
It's because you weren't Bulgarian,
right?
You weren't born a weightlifter. But the whole internal external shoulder rotation thing. The first thing I remember seeing about this that started really confusing people was some young man went to China and trained with some Chinese coach. I think it was like one of the million, regional training center coaches, who was telling him to internally rotate.
Chinese and you lift weights doesn't mean that you're a Chinese weightlifting superstar. There are plenty of people who trained in the Chinese system that never made it to a top level, like millions. Just want to put that out there.
Okay. Can I finish the sentence now?
Yeah.
Write your thoughts down and let's get to them at another time.
No.
Anyway, to go back to what I was saying, because I fucking forgot where I was. This guy, holy fuck, Ursula, give me a break. This guy went to China, worked with some Chinese coach that I do not know. Like Ursula said, one of the millions who probably never produced anyone that you've ever heard of, although that's kind of incidental to the story. Who was teaching him, full internal rotation. And to me, that was the new Bulgarian split squat. Like, hey, look, these stupid fucking Americans don't even know how to hold a bar overhead. Watch this. And, I started getting questions about it from all these people, again, emails and, social media stuff. And I was like, I've never seen any lifter do that. And so I was like, am I stupid? And I started looking up videos and photos of all these elite Chinese lifters. Not a single one of them has their shoulders or their arms internally rotated to any significant degree. And so I was like, okay, this guy's just fucking with us. And you have people who want to sell you the next big thing, the next secret to snatching. Like, oh, well, you'd put 30 kilos in your snatch if you would just externally rotate your arm or internally rotate your arm all the way. And it's just silly. The evidence is all there. Go look at all these elite level lifters, examine as closely as you want the position their arms are in overhead. And with the exception of a lift that went somewhat wrong, where there was rotation one way or another in order to save a lift that was going to be dropped, you're not really going to see any dramatic internal or external rotation, with an intentional position. Now, like I say in those seminars, like I say in my book, there is variation among lifters anatomically. And not just with regard to mobility, but actual anatomy, the structure of their bones, where things attach, this and that will influence exactly what position is most stable and most secure and strongest and most comfortable. But it's going to be within a relatively small range. And so what I teach is neutral, which in other words is about halfway between full internal and full external rotation in that snatch. So if we're looking at the bony point of the elbow, that's about halfway between pointing straight down and straight back. To to me, that is the most stable, the most comfortable, and it reinforces what I consider to be the proper scapular position, which is retraction and upward rotation, or as I say, squeeze the upper inside edges together forcefully. So that opens the shoulder, it reinforces that shoulder blade position, and you get some support with the bony structure. In other words, it's not you're relying less on strictly elbow extension through muscular effort. You have some skeletal support, and you're not internally rotating to get more skeletal support and then sacrificing that position of your shoulder. I think Roman says it perfectly here when he says, then I went to the Catalyst seminar and it made sense to me. This is ultimately what I'm going to tell people is hold a bar overhead with heavy weight, try the positions and see which one is most stable and feels like it's not tearing your shoulders out. You're going to end up in a relatively neutral position 99 times out of 100. And I think the one time out of 100 is going to be someone who has really fucked up shoulder mobility, in which case they're probably going to end up internally rotating because their shoulder girdle is so tight, or they're just being stubborn dickheads. Like, nope, this feels much better. And then, 6 months later, you talk to them after their rotator cuff surgery. Ursula, what thoughts did you write down during my tirade?
Let's see. I think for me, the simple way to teach this, and because there is variation, is I usually have a lifter put the bar behind their neck, drop their elbows down, and push straight up on the bar. Because that's what you're trying to do, push straight up on the bars, it's locked out overhead. You'll get any variation, and I always look at the inside of the elbow to see if the inside of the elbow is facing towards the ceiling. It doesn't have to be completely open towards the ceiling, but towards the ceiling. So that would mean that you didn't internally rotate your shoulders so much that the elbow is turning towards the wall, which put a lot of stress on your wrist, by the way. And then also, in the glenohumeral joint, you'd have that shoulder rotating forward, and you're endangering an actual dislocation at that point. So, as Greg said, if you have a shoulder mobility issues, you might get something like that where the person's shoulder starts to creep up and you can see the trap starting to activate. I would start working on mobility for that person before I let them snatch. And I've actually seen 2 dislocations from CrossFit. Because as they were squatting, they were actually internally rotating as they sat down. And so then they were losing the support that you have in that shoulder from the back, trying to push it onto the pec, and then the shoulder just dislocated. So it can be dangerous to get a lot of internal rotation overhead. I think one of the things that we can look at just from a physiological perspective is that, you'll notice like the development in some of the lifters in the delt. And I think a lot of people misidentify. Like if you have somebody with a lot of delt and pec development, when they put the bar overhead, it looks a little bit different because of the elevation of the pec into the shoulder when they push it up. So you see like the whole mass of the pec moving up. And the pec's is going to be more active whenever you have a little bit of internal rotation. And so you'll notice that on some of those athletes, there's either more pec development that comes from that, or the desire to use the pec for the stabilization overhead because they've developed the pec. And the trade-off, and one of the things I did was I went through and just kind of wrote down the list of what's active during internal rotation versus external rotation. And the difference really comes down to the pec being more active in internal rotation, and the infraspinatus taking up, working in the back during external rotation. And so most lifters try to carry the weight more in the back when the bar's overhead. So that kind of points to the fact that more lifters have more of an externally rotated position when the bar's overhead. Now, there are some exceptions, obviously, in lifters either in their development or their lack of mobility that would cause them to use a slightly internally rotated position. But I would argue that in most of those cases, if you look at the inside of the elbow, it's still generally facing the ceiling. And so you're not really getting a large degree of internal rotation as people would think. It may appear to be that way because of the development of the musculature, particularly in the deltoid and the pec, that comes with that particular position. There was one thing else I was going to say. Oh, and someone who has, like, for example, hyperextension in the elbow, so hypermobility in the elbow, we do a couple of things. One, we give them a slight internal rotation so that the elbow doesn't point out and create like a bow. But that's really an exception, but it should be intentional. What you're trying to create is the strongest position overhead for each individual athlete, which means that the overhead position for every individual athlete is individualized. So you don't want, I wouldn't say to force internal rotation nor force external rotation. You should have enough external rotation to be able to balance overhead with the bar over the shoulder. But that doesn't mean that you can have no measure of internal rotation whatsoever. And in fact, there are a few elite lifters that do. And what you don't want to do is try to teach your idiosyncrasies to someone else. Biomechanically, I think you're and physiologically, you're in a better place if you can have a larger degree of external rotation because of the inclusion of more back muscles as opposed to shifting it to the load to the pec and the front of the delt. But in any case, you're going to have somewhat of a variation depending on each individual. And I would try not to force anything unless you think someone is so internally rotated that they're risking dislocation of the shoulder, or if as they go into the squat, that degree of internal rotation increases.
Yes.
Because then you have an actual turning of the shoulder as you're sitting down. And so you're really loading more in an unstable position, an unsupported position, more weight into the bottom position. And that's where I've seen the dislocations. So it can happen. If you internally rotate as you squat with the bar overhead, you can dislocate your shoulder. So that's a real thing. That's not like,
that's a real
it's not
thing.
like, oh, it might happen. It can happen for sure.
It's a real thing, unlike most of the stuff we talk about, which we're just
that actually does happen.
Yeah, no, I agree. If I had to choose one or the other, I would definitely err on the side of external rotation rather than internal. It's a much less sketchy position. It's
more stable and better supported for most people. But some people need to bring in like the pec in the front of the delt in order. And you'll notice that sometimes it traps, which means now they're not loading in the mid back to hold the bar. They're up in the trap area, and that actually pushes the bar forward.
Yeah, so if you don't feel that your upper back, like your scap area, is doing the vast majority of the work holding the bar overhead, then you're in a bad position. You shouldn't feel it in the front of your shoulders and your pecs. That's an indication that you're basically about to die.
I usually have people, like, I smack them on the back of their traps and get them to relax their traps as they push overhead a little bit. The traps are going to contract to some degree, but if you shrug as you're doing it, you're actually pushing the bar forward.
Well, yeah, but contracting the traps doesn't necessarily mean shrugging. Your trap's like a giant freaking muscle that goes all the way down your back.
The traps the upper traps.
Yeah. All right. Let's stop talking. I'm sick of this.
Okay. Did we do an hour at least?
Okay, yes, you can talk for another 7 minutes to get a full hour if you want. I have nothing left to say.
Well, since you hate everybody, including me.
Should we just let it run for another 7 minutes of dead air and then say bye right at the end? Like a hidden track. Remember in the olden days when they had tapes and CDs?
We're going to say something really important. We're going to answer one more question in 4 minutes, and then we don't.
No, we're not going to answer another question. We've hit our quota. That was 5 questions.
I don't have any more questions. That's a lot, but I told you some of them were but they're worth answering. Even the short ones I think are worth answering. Y'all let Greg know that.
I don't act like I'm blocking short questions, but we also don't want an episode that has 15 questions in it.
I don't know. Somebody might.
Okay. Well, speaking as the guy who has to get that stuff organized and published in a way that's actually accessible to people and lets them know what's in it, no.
Okay, you're the brainchild of the podcast. What do you want from me?
You know what I want from you? Punctuality.
He not only does it, I know you do, but you're not going to get it.
Yeah, no, I know.
Greg really does do all the work on the podcast. I just call in.
Ursula's just the good looks.
As I planned. This is turned out exactly as I planned.
Yeah, no shit.
Totally podcast and then talk him into it, and then he's got to go through the questions, and then he's got to try to track me down, I just came from Ecuador. I was in Ecuador yesterday.
I don't care about your excuses.
You don't care? He doesn't care. He doesn't care. I'm leaving to Moscow tomorrow. He also doesn't care. That's exactly what I get from him.
You wanted to do this, so make it happen.
I know.
You can't say, let's do this thing, and then give me a litany of excuses for why you can't do it.
No, I can do it.
I will shut it down.
Everyone will hate you if you shut down your podcast.
You know what? They probably are going to anyway eventually, so I might as well get it over with.
And you don't care. I know.
One of these days, I'm looking forward to the day that I don't actually have to care and rely on people's good opinion of me to make an income.
Well, you're not there
God,
yet.
that would be really less stressful.
So good luck with that.
Yeah, no.
Anyways, all right, guys.
I need it. Okay.
Go down, Greg.
Go post a review, please, if you love the show. We would appreciate it. It'd make us feel better about ourselves, and basically you're ensuring the continued existence of this show by showing your support in that way. Because otherwise, I'm just going to assume that everyone hates it, and I'm just going to stop doing it. How's that for a veiled threat?
Yeah, it's an empty threat. I'll track you down like a wild boar.
Yeah.
So don't forget to go to the Naturally Fit website and check out the Weightlifting Wise Championships.
God, we almost made it without your dog.
I know. He just lost his shit. He's calling me. Gotta go. Mikros needs me.
Yes.
All right,
World
Greg.
needs you. Okay, guys. Thank you for listening.
Y'all have a good one.